crises can come in many forms and can also take a number of unexpected turns. In fact, the Chinese symbol for crisis involves two brushstrokes, one for danger and one for opportunity. For leaders facing a crisis, it is crucial to have multiple strategies for controlling the narrative among employees to quell concerns and turn that danger into an opportunity for positive change. What do you do when times are tough to keep your team together? How can you build a team of resilient leaders? Welcome to Yo's Back to Work podcast. I'm your host, Joe McIntyre. On this episode, we are exploring how leaders can navigate crises and either prevent or resolve internal issues with employees. Today, I am excited to welcome Ursula Williams, President of Staffing Industry Analysts, or SIA as most of us know it. SIA is the go-to research and advisory firm for everything related to staffing and workforce solutions. SIA provides valuable insights and advice to help businesses navigate the complex staffing world. Ursula has been with SIA since 2015, initially joining as the Senior Vice President of Global Strategy and Marketing. She has held various leadership roles, most recently as Chief Operating Officer from 2019 to 2024. And this year, she was appointed President, overseeing the company's global strategy, operations, and growth. Ursula, thanks for joining us on the podcast.
Thanks, Joe. It's great to be here.
Well, you have, I think, 3 decades of experience in this industry and a ton of experience and expert insights. So we're really excited to talk to you about crises, which I'm sure all of us, including yourself, have gone through one in one way or the other. So can you give us maybe an example of a time where you may have faced a crisis and how leadership took charge, eased workers' concerns, and found a resolution?
Yeah, I'd love to. Of course, crises, it's interesting. I think people thrive in really good times, and I think people can thrive in really difficult times as well. It's all about your mindset and you realize that it happens. And so how you respond to it is really in your control. The crisis might not be. So probably the most recent was really, what you probably hear a lot right now, but the aftermath of COVID-19. So, going into that was a really uncertain time in 2020. Our organization does very large scale conferences and events. So as you would imagine, that was pretty detrimental to our business model and to all of our customers that rely on us and those events. So we had to make some early decisions as to, go, no go, and then pivoting and deciding what we were going to do. And we didn't have a lot of time. We were going live with a very, very large event in March of 2020. It was right around the time where it was starting to become clear there were going to be issues. I don't think there was a worldwide lockdown yet, but there was major concern about super spreaders and different types of events that would cause, great harm to individuals. We live and work in Silicon Valley, and it was very progressive in terms of identifying what was happening. It was also one of the very early hit communities. So some of the policies that were being put in place in the county in which our office was really kind of dictated what we could and could not do. So we had to make some decisions. There were multi-million-dollar decisions to ourselves, to our customers, and for our employees, it was a really scary time because our company and what we rely on often is, the conferences to power our business model. So, the things that we had to do and the lessons that we learned and how we moved forward with that, there's no perfect answer. So, when crisis hits you, you got to move fast and you have to make some decisions. You need people there with you to make the decisions so that you have their buy-in and they're part of it and they're already down the path in executing whatever that strategy is going to be. And you have to be able to be a little vulnerable and listen to people and ask questions and have really good open communication. Be real, but be positive, and be resilient. And be able to just know what's happening in each day and what it brings and being in touch and not being afraid to course correct if you have to, because, after all, you didn't have a lot of time to think about it, and you'll make your way through it.
Yeah, you mentioned it in the beginning of your answer, but it can be easy to be a leader when times are going well, business is going great. But the true leaders really shine when things aren't going as great, or when there is an issue with an employee or with multiple employees or in the world, like with COVID. So are there any lessons you learned during either the COVID pandemic that you mentioned before that you didn't talk about yet that led you to becoming a better crisis manager for those you work with?
It's easy to kind of sit back, I think, and think you need time, you need to reflect, you have to, in every single time of crisis, I think one of the key things is you need to respond pretty quickly, and you need to be decisive. And you don't want to go at it alone. You definitely want to rely on your senior team or even other people that are a part of it. Be open and communicate a lot. And those are the things that I would say, I actually use those daily in my life also. But yeah, it's people look to you as the leader. It's amazing how people that in regular, normal, ongoing times are very proactive and they're leaders within themselves and their roles. But in a crisis, people react very differently and it triggers a lot of different emotions with people. And you don't know what's going on outside of their work life often. So, as that leader, you have to move quick and you got to be decisive and clear and open and transparent, definitely humble and use some emotional intelligence and all of those things, but you got to act.
Yeah. I mean, when times are tough and you're dealing with multiple different people who have multiple different reactions to when things go wrong, multiple different personalities to deal with, not everybody is the same. So, what do you do when times are tough to keep teams together, to keep people from either, not necessarily turning on one another, but, everybody fighting for that same goal?
Yeah, Joe, that's the golden the golden question right there. I like teams that are different. I love putting groups together that they've got a common culture or the purpose and they know what we're doing and what we're there to achieve, but they do come at things slightly differently. So um, that's kind of one of my things. And what I like about that is when you are in difficult times, you have different people that will react differently. Bottom line, they have to have respect for one another. They have to have been a team in good times because when you're going into bad times, if you've got cracks in your team, they're going to really be companions, right? And you're in a difficult time. So I think, my advice would be get your team. If you see problems on your team, if personalities on the team in best of times, you need to mind for that. You need to help to get that resolved. Don't get in the way. Don't be the wedge. Don't be the third person of the party. Have them work it out directly, but guide and coach and do those things. And then I think the same thing. I think in times of crisis, um, I like to actually mind for it. I like to, without creating it or fostering it. But if someone's really quiet on a call, as an example, I'll say, hey, you know what? What are you thinking? Like bring it forward. It's okay. And so I think it's also creating some safety in that as well, because oftentimes it's somebody has an opposing opinion, but they're just like maybe they're not the most outspoken one in the group, or they're like, okay, I'm going to say this. The danger is they're going to get off the call and they're going to tell it to someone else, right? And then it creates a bunch of like meetings after the meeting. So I tend to like to really kind of mind for it, but again, doing it in a safe way.
There is some competing thoughts here that, during a crisis, you need to be strong and confident while also being vulnerable and empathetic to your team. Those can be competing ideals at times. How can you kind of weigh the need to be, as a leader, strong and show confidence while also being vulnerable with your team and saying like, hey, I'm going through the same thing as you are? It feels difficult to manage.
I think it is. And I separate them because there's qualities that a leader brings and what the leader has to do for the team. And then we're just people. Like, no one was like, you get the leader button, you get this other one. So communicating and being really open and really honest with people, but also creating a clear path. Okay, yes, this is this. I get this, I get that. I understand. That's all the empathetic, I understand this, tell me this, asking questions, but there is a pathway. And to be able to hold people accountable also in those difficult times and to be able to guide them and set a framework, but also give them their own, when I say guide and frameworks and plans, I like to, anyone who works on my team knows this. I like to just do the framework and then I'll say like within that area, that's yours. So you're empowered and you carry it out and you do it how you do it. But here's your boundaries and here's what you have to work with and here's the racy and here's everybody else. And I think people tend to really appreciate that. And and I'll also say, like, look, here's the concept of what's going on and here's what I see, but and be clear on what we want and where we're going, but also how we get there. That people, the leaders themselves within their teams, have to help navigate that. I don't know the best way to work within their groups, right? So I think it's a lot of I think you can be resilient, you can be a leader, you can have clear communication, frequent communication, hold people accountable, and still be empathetic.
Yeah. Yeah, you just mentioned resiliency, and this may be a philosophical question, maybe chicken or the egg. But is it possible to build resiliency in others, or is it something you're born with? And if it is possible to build it in others, how in the world do you do that?
I definitely think some people are just more resilient than others. I don't know if they're born with it. I don't know if their childhood creates it. They say that we're shaped, I think, who we are by 4 or something. So, but I definitely think that it could be fostered. And the ways that you do that is just to remind people where you're going. I feel like most businesses, our business is very growth minded. I'm very growth minded. I am purpose driven and I'm growth minded. So I know what our purpose is. I know what our financial targets are. And I know that we're going to go forward fast to get there. And so what I say to people, like, you've got to be able to make decisions. You have to be decisive. If you aren't decisive and you aren't making decisions, it's really hard to be resilient, because when that moment comes, you're kind of anchored by all of these unfinished things and they come back at you. Don't seek the perfect decision, right? And so, and there's probably a series of other things that for me just builds resiliency. Move on. So if something didn't go as great as you'd like it to go, sometimes there's a tendency to want to talk to everybody about it. And I find that those people are also kind of seeking a little bit more assurance, and it's their way of kind of going through it. And I'm like, look, talk about it and move, learn from it, and then you got to move forward, because what you don't realize is nobody is looking at you like you're looking at you. Like you're so in it. They're, everyone on the outside, they don't really know. So you're actually out there perpetuating, issues. So those are just some of the ways where I think little techniques and observing it and getting people to move on helps to make them resilient. There's some coaching that I was given early on by a teacher, and I shared it with my mom, and I was probably 10, and she said the same thing, and it was deal with whatever you have to deal with today, because tomorrow will bring other things to deal with. So it's just part of life. It isn't like, people say, oh, I'm having a really bad day or really bad luck. No, it's just life. So I think also when you can approach it that way, to know today might be sunny and tomorrow might be cloudy. That's just, you have to be flexible. You have to be agile, and that's kind of building resiliency, right? Knowing to kind of go the way it's going, control what you can control. It's cloudy. You're going to wear a coat, so you can still take care of your body temperature, like these little, you can just adapt and control at the same time. But I definitely think that you can foster resiliency in people.
I mean, SIA has been advising people and organizations for a long time on how to build their teams and how to find the right people. Is it possible to identify, or rather, how do you identify those traits of resiliency or the traits that you're looking for in a team during the hiring process, so you find people, to your left and to your right, who can handle the tough times just as well as, or even better within the good times?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's probably all kinds of tests for it, all kinds of ways that you can do that. But I think for me, the types of companies they came from, the types of examples that they provide in the interview process of what their career in the last few years, what they've dealt with. I think just by generally trying to, have that open communication to understand, and what do they want? some people don't like, they are really uncomfortable in constantly changing and evolving times, right? And that's just a baseline. So I had the pleasure of working with a group of amazing women leaders in staffing, and we wrote a book, and we each had a chapter. My chapter is Get Comfortable Being Uncomfortable. And part of that is just really the message that that's, again, I'll go back to what I said, it's life. And every day's a little different, and you're going to feel a little uncomfortable, and that's okay. Lean into it, embrace it, and move on. And so I think when I interview people, and I'm looking for people that are growth minded and that can be resilient and they're comfortable with change, and yet, not people that every single day they have to have change, and so it's disruptive and chaotic. I think they're just comfortable with change that growth as an organization brings on, or organizations at different stages go through. And it can be even, Joe, like organizational design change. A lot of the staffing companies, when they start and they have a certain shape and certain leaders, and it's like, mile wide, inch deep. A lot of hats are worn by a lot of the executives, and then as they grow, they have to get more specialized, and those people have to figure out where they fit and how they fit. And we've had some that say, the people that got you here aren't going to get you there. And it's really tragic, because relationships are formed and bonded. And so I think for the individuals and for the leaders, you have to hire resilient and growth minded if that's what you want in your organization or where you're going. And you have to continue to foster it every day. Like, I just feel like you have to talk about it a lot and remind people where you're going and maybe why they're feeling how they're feeling, and validating that it's okay, we're all growing.
I think you mentioned earlier, obviously, COVID was something that none of us could control. But there are sometimes crises internally that people kind of see bubbling up a little bit, and we want to try to head off before they get into something that's full blown. Are there any strategies or steps that leaders can take or folks can take to kind of head off some of these more internal issues before they get worse? Is it just a simple fact of better communication, or is it more complex than that?
I think it's a little more complex. I mean, I think communication's great. I tend to, you went through my background, and I've been in the business for a long time, and I've just been in business a long time. Mergers, acquisitions, hiring teams, regional teams, national teams, international, local. I'm close to the ground, and I've got a good pulse on the business. I do think I probably have a high emotional quotient in terms of like sensing and feeling and knowing what's going on. And I also like data. Like, I like the trends. I like the analytics. Like, my recommendation is for all leaders, yes, you've got your feelers and your pulse, and you kind of can see, but you have to set up some KPIs in your business to understand what's happening, and you've got to watch them. Because that's your outside validator. Like, I think the combination of the two, right, are great. Like, and when I say the combination, I mean not just what you're thinking and feeling and seeing, but like your leaders or your people. I'm big on one-on-ones. I don't like to skip a one-on-one, and when I say one-on-one, I mean every 5 days. I'm a one-on-one, and I like the teams to have their one-on-ones and to have their staff meetings. And I think that communication flow is really important, and that's where you pick things up. But that data, Joe, is like when you can make a data-driven decision and you can see what the trends are telling you, it's powerful. I definitely, though, think you have to act on it. You have to be able to see it, and 2 weeks don't make a trend, but you definitely have to be able to see it and to act on it and to move quickly.
Yeah, you mentioned data, so let's stick on that for a second. Is it possible to measure the success of your leadership, either yourself or the others on your team, during a crisis? Is there a way to kind of measure how well or how not well we did during a pretty tough time?
It's hard, but yeah, I think you can. I think that outcomes are easier, but like by then it's a little late. So you look back and you can go, okay, how did we do? So I think you have to have milestones along the way, because typically in a crisis, you're also pivoting. you have your plan and you know what you want to do, but then you've got these milestones within that other things. It's not like, a crisis hits and that's it. There are, things that happen after the crisis that you have to keep dealing with that were unknowns going into it. So I think periodic check-ins, I think identifying what short-term successes will look like, stopping to pause to say what worked, what didn't work. Okay, let's regroup, let's go forward, let's stay the course, let's do these things. I think also it's a crisis. You got to check in with these people. You have to know, where are they, what's going on with them. When I reflect back on the pandemic, we primarily, a lot of us worked in the same office together. We had some remote teams as well, but we were there together. And so you could actually look across the room where you'd be like, oh, so-and-so hasn't been out of her office all day long, or Q all day long, or they seem a little low. And we didn't have that. And so, the check-ins were different, but I would notice things that you could see when someone was just a little further back from their camera, or, sometimes I'd be like, hey, how you doing? Hey, stay on for a second. And, there were a lot of cues that you could pick up on. But I think it's really, I know we're talking about success of the plan and what happens, but I think that the people and where they're at, their mental health, their well-being, what's going on in their family, their own panic about the business themselves. You don't know everybody's financial situation and what they're, what they might be worried. Like, is the company healthy? Is it going to go out of business? Am I going to have a job? How, and maybe I just bought a house, or I just had a child, or like what happens there. So it's, in work sometimes, like, especially like early in my career, it was like, this is work, that's personal, leave it at the door. I just don't see that anymore. People are getting text messages in the middle of the day, and I had one, and she's like, oh, my daughter, she's so upset at school, and it's like ruined my day. And there was a day that doesn't happen, right? Because you didn't hear from your child during those hours, and inevitably you go home and the kid doesn't even remember what they texted you about. But it's so much harder on the parent. So it's complex.
Yeah. As we kind of close out here, you mentioned the book that you wrote a chapter on, and we'll include that in the episode description here. But are there any leaders or books you've read or people that you go to that you would recommend our audience check out or listen to, who have spoken on, leadership skills in challenging times?
I like all of Patrick Lencioni's work. And because I feel like it's in good times, bad times, crisis. Like, I really like it. Like the 5 dysfunctions of a team, or the advantage. I like those reads. They're easy. They allow me to reflect while I'm reading, and I can see examples, and like, it's almost like I'm like, is he sitting in my office? Like, you can. So just off the top of my head, I like all of that work. And I would definitely pick that up. I also like, there's a lot of good HBR articles. Like, I was just reading one that was about, right now there's a lot of performance management discussions going on with the current economic times, and especially in staffing. It's been really, really difficult. And we have coming off of 14 years of phenomenal economic times, where there were so many jobs, and there were so many jobs orders, we call them in the business, that were going to the staffing companies, and it was a talent crisis, and it was hard to find the talent. And now the orders aren't where they were, right? Because the job growth has slowed. And so the leaders are having to manage their teams differently. And it really it creates a lot of tension and conflict, and just like, how do we do it? What do we do? And I think that, there was an article that I was just reading, and it said, it's that balance between letting them figure it out and going, it's crisis. I don't have enough time. I've got to pay the bills here at this business. And so and as a leader, you want to jump in, and you want to get as close as you can, and you want to, you want to fix everything, and you want to pull everything apart, and you want daily communication. And it was just a really great article, because it was helping you strike the balance and reflecting on it. those are always easy lifts. They're 10-minute, 15-minute reads. So I tend to like a lot of that as well.
Ursula, thank you so much for joining us on this episode and talking about, what happens when times are bad. Not always are times really great, and not always are teams really connected. So thank you for doing that. If our listeners want to connect with you, how can they reach you?
They are welcome to reach me on LinkedIn. They can IM me. They can connect with me. They can follow me. I'm available by email. I get to see a lot of your customers and at our conferences and our events. So if anyone's listening that happens to be coming one, just come find me. I'm usually on stage and I'd love to meet you.
Perfect. And to our listeners, I also want to thank you for tuning into Yo's Back to Work podcast. To hear future episodes, please subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen in. For Yo's Back to Work, I'm Joe McIntyre. Thanks for listening.